Hello, my dear viewers. It's good to be with you. My name is Olga Demchuk, and I am a researcher of the inner world of personality. As you know, I am preparing for a webinar about wounded self-esteem. I am exploring this topic and will be sharing my findings with you, not only during the webinar, but also beforehand. So today we will talk about the topic, I don't want to be worse. People often say, I compare myself to everyone. And when a person says this, they usually mean some other people out there. But at the same time, they overlook the fact that in reality, they are comparing everyone else to themselves. In other words, they see themselves as a kind of benchmark, and they compare this standard to all other people. And as a result of this comparison, they draw some kind of conclusion. And this conclusion, most often, it's about being better or worse. So in fact, in this comparison, I have to place someone above and someone below. And when in this comparison I am above, then everything is fine, everything feels right. But if I have to put someone above me, at that moment I feel that I'm worse. In other words, that I am lower. When we talk about the I as a standard by which we compare everything, we rarely stop to think about what kind of standard this actually is. When a person tries, through self-reflection, to answer the question, what am I like? They have only a vague idea, a kind of haze, where sometimes they see themselves as very wonderful, kind, and intelligent, and at other times, quite the opposite. They think of themselves as foolish and terrible. And these polarities create this instability not only in self-identity, but also in this very moment of comparison. That is, in fact, my identity, my idea of myself, depends on my mood in that moment. If I am in a bad mood, then as I begin to look at myself, I start to see myself as terrible. But if I am in a good or elevated mood, if something has worked out for me, then I see myself as wonderful. As you can see, this cloud of self-perception is quite changeable. And in addition to this, we are also forbidden from knowing much about ourselves. That is, if we try to define the parameters of this ideal, list its aspects and qualities, it would be preferable to have some kind of objective picture. But as you already know, especially those of you who have been watching my YouTube channel for a long time, it is often quite difficult to admit certain things to ourselves. That is, there are qualities that we really do not want to acknowledge. Because if we discover these qualities in ourselves, at that moment we definitely feel worse, even downright awful and bad. Especially those qualities that belong to our animal nature. For example, unrecognized cruelty, the desire to dominate, to be better, these all come from that inner beast. Because being the best is always about being the alpha. That is, it is always about the alpha female or the alpha male. Let it be only for a small moment, a few minutes, even a few seconds. But this feeling of being at the top, of being the best, even if only in comparison with a neighbor or with a colleague sitting at the next desk, reunites a person with the very peak of their aspirations. That is, when I am the best, in that moment, I feel maximum safety. And in this state of maximum safety, ideally, I would like to control the world, to be its king, even if only for a second. I can even remain silent or endure something, and that makes me better. For example, a person endures, says nothing, and in that moment they may feel wonderful, superior. So when we talk with you about this vague ideal, about a world named after oneself, in which I have no complaints against myself, only at this peak, when I am better, do we begin to talk about the consequences of all this. That is, if I have this invisible, unacknowledged ideal, then accordingly I will experience, for example, envy. Because if I feel that someone is better, then at that moment, something will awaken within me, namely my envy. But envy is a much broader topic. For those who are subscribed to the sponsorship, there will be a video released on Tuesday specifically about that. But now I will move on to two other consequences. They are the willingness to be better and the willingness to be worse. the willingness to be better. This often goes unnoticed. As I mentioned, this is natural. In other words, when we are better, it doesn't hurt us or bother us. And when someone is worse off, we feel just fine. There's no reason for concern. That's why it seems like we only remember and pay attention to the moments when we are worse. But in reality, being better and being worse, these are two sides of the same coin. In other words, one cannot exist without the other. If I don't want to be better, then I won't be able to be worse either. Let me say that again. If I don't want to be better, then I will never be worse. And if I don't want to be better, I simply can't be worse. Then I move into a completely different frame of reference where a sense of otherness appears. In other words, instead of living in a world centered around myself, where I am the standard, there are different worlds belonging to different people. And these worlds might not suit me at all. So the desire to be better and the deeply inherent and accompanying willingness to be temporarily less effective or even worse at the task, worseness. The feeling of worseness can be divided into two conditional types. There is a type of homegrown negativity and worseness, which we actively create within ourselves. And then there is the external worseness that is frequently presented and offered to us by others. That is, let's start with homegrown worseness. This self-created sense of worseness arises when a person launches attacks against themselves. I think that many of you who have been watching my YouTube channel for a long time at first perceived what I say about the structure of the inner world as if I had discovered that I am worse than I really am. In other words, a person did not perceive this as information, as a structure, as some inevitable aspect of themselves, certain traits, but rather as if it turns out I am worse than I thought of myself. And when a person listens to information about how the world is structured, for example, that you will inevitably try to assert yourself from the beast part. In order not to act on this, you need to become aware of it and not behave according to this tendency. So it's essentially a cause and effect relationship. But at that moment when I realized that I want to assert myself, I exclaimed, "Oh my God, how terrible, could it really be true about me? Or should I reject this? Or should I start berating myself for it?" This feeling that I'm worse than I thought of myself, it's something a person creates within themselves. But there is a certain category of people who are constantly in a state of being better. It's as if they are always jumping on a trampoline, wanting to stay at the top, or like a badminton shuttlecock that we keep hitting so it stays up in the air. So when we encounter another person for whom it is vitally important to be better, otherwise their instinct for self-preservation starts to attack them, or they turn to self-aggression, or they begin to feel unsafe. In other words, when there is a lot of beast inside, you start to feel unsafe among others. That is, only when I am better do I feel safe. If I'm even a little bit worse, that's it. I get scared, I attack myself, and I can't endure it. And around such people, a certain field is created, a certain kind of emotional space around them. And if there is another person somewhere nearby with this kind of unstable self-esteem, then they will inevitably begin to feel certain emotions too. So, in this detailed video today, I would really like to bring to your attention and discuss in detail the various complex processes that can naturally arise around people of a specific type. But at the same time, as always, I ask you to pay attention to yourself. That is, when you want to be better, the people around you will sense it. And then it becomes unsurprising why people react this way, why people distance themselves, and why some even stop communicating. So when we spread this desire to be better around us, others may respond in certain ways. They might either enter into a competitive struggle with us or choose to take a lower seat, so to speak. Let's look at a few examples because here, intonation and emotional context are very important. It is precisely these that reveal everything. For example, imagine a group of friends who have decided to have a barbecue together. And in this group, there is someone who is a vegetarian. Whether it's a man or a woman doesn't really matter. And so people are laughing, maybe they've had a little to drink, they're threading meat onto skewers for the barbecue, and this person enters the scene and says, "Are you really going to eat meat?" You see, just from the tone, it's already clear. This person feels superior because they don't eat meat, while the others are somehow lesser. Are you really going to drink wine? Are you going to drink beer? In this phrasing, the person says, "What did I say that's so wrong? What did I say?" But everyone around starts to feel that he is not worse than them. This is what happens when someone in a group constantly associates themselves with some ideal image. They begin to use the whole group to serve their own needs. For example, during a session, someone might say, "I had an argument with my husband," and the other person says, "I don't know, my husband and I never argue." Or, "Well, you really shouldn't have argued." You see, here the position is always coming from someone who thinks they're better. And these little phrases, they constantly trigger the mechanisms that already exist in the other person. It's as if you have to become worse compared to me. For example, men complain to a friend saying, "My wife and I sometimes go an entire day without calling each other even once." And the friend replies, "Well, we call each other 3 times a day." You see, all of this happens on subtle emotional levels. So, first of all, I suggest you learn to recognize when you do this so you can understand why people start to perceive you negatively. Secondly, when someone behaves this way around you, it often provokes aggression. Now, for those who are not allowed to express aggression, they might experience either a freeze response, a sense of inadequacy, or simply the urge to run away. But when you acknowledge this process as something conditionally natural, like in the animal world where someone has to be the alpha, where the best females and males, the best food, are reserved for them, if you understand the inherent nature of these processes, then you can avoid feeling angry, inferior, or having the urge to jump into a fight like a deer. Locking horns, trying to determine who among us is the alpha male, who is better. So, when we understand what this is and why it happens, we start to have fewer emotions about it because we don't take it personally. We recognize that it's simply a human process. Of course, when someone constantly offers you the worst seat or says, "We have a car of this superior brand," or "I earn much more, so why did you agree to such a low-paying job?" In other words, when a person constantly behaves this way, it becomes quite difficult to be around them because they are always offering you the role of either a courtier or a servant. And a person with this fragile self-image seems to need to constantly check in, to always talk about their achievements, about how well things are going. And such behavior creates a lot of excitement. That is, people who do not understand how life really works are quite easily deceived by some ideal fairy tale. Such people are like sirens who lure others in, saying, "Look at me, admire me, see how wonderful I am." And people respond, "Yes, yes, someone is truly wonderful," and so on. This idea of "it's better to be better" is embedded in many advertisements and in the messaging of many bloggers. There are also people who exploit the idea that, look, they are worse than you, they are worse than you because they can't do this or because they belong to a certain category. So this better-worse dynamic, this playing with comparisons, is at work here. It all plays on this instinct of self-preservation. Well, I hope this video will help you become more self-reliant, to lean on yourself, and to experience fewer emotions in response to such manipulations, because such manipulation can trigger a lot of anger inside. So there's no need to get so anxious about this kind of behavior. And most importantly, it's about recognizing these moments within yourself. When you feel the urge to collect a folder of compromising material on someone and to see them as worse, to feel better about yourself constantly. And I invite you to check out the webinar Self-Reflection, Realistic Thinking About Yourself. It's available in English. All the information is on my website, link in description. And I'd also like to remind you that my 2 books are available there as well. Feel free to get them. I'll say goodbye for now. See you soon.